Hey, what's going on, you guys? It's Aces High, and today I'm bringing you guys video number 5 in my most interesting leader contest. So today I'm going to go a little bit more modern. Not, 100% modern, but we're going to go with Mary the First of England. Um, I know that she was the first female monarch of England. I also know that she was kind of crazy and I don't want to say evil, but just not the best leader. Let's be real. I mean, in my opinion. Apart from that, I don't know too much. So I'm really looking forward to this. If you guys haven't heard about it, I actually am doing a week of the most interesting leaders in history. And basically each day I'm posting one. So if you guys missed it, I'll go ahead and throw a link up right here for the playlist so you can catch up on all of them. At the end of the week, we're going to vote on who we think is the most interesting leader. Anyway, if you guys are ready, let's get started.
When we think of a Bloody Mary, some of us may picture the spicy cocktail, the one containing vodka and tomato juice. Others may best know Bloody Mary from the ghostly folklore. You know the one.
Yeah.
Step in front of a mirror and chant her name repeatedly. Upon uttering her name 3 times or 13 times depending on which version of the ritual you use, her apparition then appears to reveal your future. Allegedly, Bloody Mary will either show you an image of your future spouse or that of a skull, indicating that you'll die before having the chance to marry. If you
See, I didn't hear that. I've always heard that if you say Bloody Mary 3 times in the mirror in the dark, she'll show up and kill you. Um, so it was very different the way I learned it.
heard this tale as a child, your friends probably dared you to conjure her spirit in group play. If you're like us, though, you chickened out after reciting her name only twice. Mary has long been perceived as a feared figure, and there's a reason history granted her the title of Bloody Mary. Though to be among the top most evil queens in history, she spent her short 5-year reign developing a fearsome reputation for burning many Protestants at the stake in her attempt to
Wow.
reverse the English Reformation. She'd arrange executions by fire while forcing many to watch their peers burn. The
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the English, like the Protestants, wasn't it her father that actually opened English up to the Protestants for the first time? And she just decided she's not cool with that anymore? That would kind of suck. Imagine moving in just a few years later after the king kicks the bucket. Uh, the new queen says, "No, I'm going to burn you at the stake instead."
Willing spectators would then suffer the same fate afterwards. To say she was harsh is an understatement. She threw all of England into terror and chaos without showing any mercy. When we say no mercy, we're
Wow.
not kidding. She would even have pregnant women burned if she viewed them as heretics, all in the name of her religious fanaticism. Still, if you know her background and origin story, you might start to question whether Mary was indeed a villain or if she was actually a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Before you think we're crazy for even suggesting it, allow us to explain. After learning about her story, you can decide for yourself what you think to be the case. Before she was the crazed queen, she was just a little girl. Born in 1516, Mary Tudor was the only surviving child of King Henry VIII and Queen Catherine of Aragon. Initially, life for her started out great. She was a little princess beloved by her mother, her father, and the people of England. There was just one problem. She was a girl. Realizing there may be no other children, mainly no sons, to inherit the throne, Mary's mother Catherine groomed her at an early age for a promising future as the Queen of England to be. Catherine taught her Latin, thought at the time to be a man's language, so that Mary could someday fulfill the most masculine of roles, that of a sovereign. Though Henry was proud of this daughter, her accomplishments wouldn't be enough for him later, and he'd still want a son. Being the daughter of the King of England and the Spanish princess, Mary also was considered a hot commodity for marriage. Her hand was often promised to sons of various rulers for sake of alliances and political gain. All of these betrothals fell through though. When she turned 11, only a year under the minimum legal age for marriage, her future betrothal was more seriously considered. Before she could embark into a successful marriage, however, something happened that would change her life forever. That is, her father fell madly in love with a woman, Anne Boleyn, and wanted a divorce with her mother. This was probably the biggest, most defining event for Mary due to the numerous repercussions that followed. It was from this moment on that Mary would never again experience a day of happiness. Now, before you jump to judgment and think, well, lots of children's parents get divorced, but they don't grow up to become murderers, we'd advise you to consider that the prospect of divorce was a way bigger deal than it is today, especially for royalty. And this was no ordinary divorce, but rather an event that would forever alter the course of English history. There was also a
And let's be real, we've all heard the stories of what happened to King Henry XVI and his divorces and his wives and just Yeah, we know how that story worked. So yeah.
String of negative consequences that resulted from this momentous change that caused a lot of trauma in Mary's life. And on top of everything situational that was going on, Mary's health wasn't the greatest. Specifically, she experienced severe menstrual problems, thought today to be endometriosis. She had something known as dysmenorrhea, which gave her agonizing pain and cramping, worse than the typical monthly discomfort that many women endure. It was chronic and recurring. This was termed as her usual troubles or her old disease by royal physicians at the time. Her debilitating pain accompanied by irregular hormone fluctuations also frequently caused her serious depression, which only served to exacerbate her misery. Today, we now understand that stress can worsen symptoms of endometriosis, and Mary experienced plenty of strain when Anne Boleyn entered the picture. Mary's intense anxiety provoked a particularly nasty flare-up of agony in 1531, soon after Henry forced her mother, Catherine, to leave court while treating Anne as the new queen-to-be. When her father, Henry, granted himself his divorce after being denied by the Pope, he disregarded Mary as illegitimate, claiming that he never truly lawfully married her mother. He'd gone from being a loving and doting father to Mary in her early years to now being a vicious, neglectful parent. If you watched our other
I've got a question. He might answer it in a second, but King Henry. First off, King Henry was kind of a nut job, in my opinion. King Henry the 16th. But if his marriage was not actually legal, then how would she become queen later? So, I mean, that seems like a little bit of foreshadowing, you know? The church had to have seen it as a legal marriage because the church had so much power at the time. It only makes sense.
episodes, Why Did the King of England Execute His Wives, and The Worst Breakup in History, then you're probably already familiar with the events that transpired. Basically, in order to divorce Catherine and marry Anne, Henry had to make some very drastic changes. That is, he had to separate England from the Roman Catholic Church and start his own new Church of England. Since Catherine had been a devoted Catholic and Mary had always followed in her footsteps, this was highly devastating for her. The new Protestant Reformation was yet another factor, a major factor, that added to Mary's profound grief, because her strong Catholic beliefs held significant meaning for her, and she refused to give them up. Many of the people of England loyally supported Mary, were on her side, and felt sympathy for both she and her ostracized mother. After all, she'd been shamefully brushed aside while being publicly humiliated and disgraced by the harsh neglect and maltreatment of her father. She'd been embarrassingly downgraded from the high rank of a princess to a servant for her half-sister, Anne Boleyn and Henry's new daughter Elizabeth, who now possessed a claim to the throne above her. Mary was a shell of what she once had been, and would now have to witness as little Elizabeth.
So that's interesting. So she still has a claim to the throne, but she's an illegitimate child, so a bastard, I guess would be the word at the time. As far as King Henry is claiming, at least. Meaning that Elizabeth actually, at the time, had a higher claim to the throne. That's really interesting.
Elizabeth enjoyed the charms of her old life. It's fair to say that Henry VIII was cold to the daughter he'd once claimed to adore, and naturally, Mary would have probably felt very jealous of Elizabeth, sad, neglected, and unloved. This was obviously degrading for Mary's status, position, and pride, as she now lost the affections of her father. To make matters worse, she was no longer permitted to see her mother either. It was also around this time when Mary experienced another painful flare-up from her endometriosis condition. Without a doubt, this was a very lonely and depressing time for Mary, a time that would only serve to spark and fuel her resentment in later years to come, as she'd someday want to retaliate for all the painful suffering she'd been forced to endure. While all of these changes were taking place, the popular but hushed belief was that the king was making a mistake, that he was being bewitched by Anne Boleyn, and that he was turning his back on God by ridding the country of the Catholic faith. Many people asserted that Mary still had the rightful claim to the throne, even though she'd been stripped of her title as princess. The people had adored her mother Catherine as their queen, but they hated Anne for being, in essence, a homewrecker. For this reason, Anne was perceived as being the great whore, and Mary was thought to be a heroic symbol of rebellion among the English people. Not surprisingly, Mary's refusal to acknowledge the annulment of her mother's marriage and recognize Anne as queen and relinquish her own positions as princess greatly angered her father. During this time, Mary was in a very precarious situation.
Seriously, that takes a lot of balls. I mean, like, not to put it that way, but like, it takes a lot of courage. Wow. you don't want to piss off this man. Like, this dude's crazy, you know? Could you guys do it? Like, let me know in the comments. Seriously, if you were in that situation and your dad, King Henry the 16th said, "Bow to your new queen," what would you do? Do you think you could honestly have the bravery to stand up, or do you think you'd actually bow? Because I'm not sure what I'd choose at this point. I value my life, you know? Wow.
Situation. Her very existence was called into question, with whispers of possible allegations of treason to be tried against her. The year of 1536 provided two major life events, turning points in her future direction. First, Mary's mother died, which struck her with further painful grief. She was depressed beyond consolation and no longer believed there was a life for her in England. She wanted desperately to leave for her mother's home country of Spain. But then something else changed. Anne Boleyn was ordered by Henry to be executed for allegations presumably staged against her. Mary was extremely pleased with Anne's death. She had absolutely despised her for destroying her life. It also gave Mary a new sense of hope for her future. Perhaps her father had changed his mind. At once, Mary wrote to him, hoping to be welcomed back to court and back in his good graces. But in return, Henry wrote that he was still displeased by Mary's stubbornness and still wanted her to submit to his law. Despite Anne Boleyn now being out of the picture, Henry continued to push that his daughter Mary recognize herself as illegitimate and her mother's marriage to him as having been unlawful. He forced her to sign a legal declaration of this. Mary was fully aware that she could be put to death if she didn't sign it. After all, if Henry was capable of killing his wife, he could certainly kill his daughter. For the Tudors, family drama could be deadly. And it wasn't just Mary's life at stake, but the lives of her most prominent supporters as well. Thus, Mary reluctantly signed the dreaded document against her conscience. As a reward, she was welcomed back to court, earned back her father's love, and was reinstated back into the line of succession. This brought her a decade of peace. You'd think it would have provided Mary with some form of a happy ending in this case, but you'd be wrong. The reality was that Mary would always live with a sense of guilt and regret for acting against her beliefs, the beliefs of God, and the beliefs of her now deceased mother, all to save her own skin and those of her friends and supporters. Yet, who can blame her? In many ways, though, she was her own harshest critic. Despite being back in good standing with her father, however, Mary still didn't marry during this time. This may be because, as we all famously know, Henry VIII was too busy collecting and discarding his own wives. Clearly, marrying off his first daughter wasn't much of a priority for him, so Mary remained single for a long time. Mary had also gained a brother, the son and heir that her father had desperately wanted, Edward VI. Mary was about 31 when her father died, and the young 9-year-old Edward took over as first in line to the throne. Mary was second in the line of succession, followed by her younger sister Elizabeth as ordered by Henry prior to his passing. But Edward, though very young, was a hardcore Protestant thanks to the influence that his advisors had over him. Thus, Mary once again fell into a threatening position due to her strong Catholic beliefs. This time, it was at the hands of her little brother, not her tyrannical father. Mary once again probably found herself in a familiar dark place, thinking there was no future and that her beloved Catholic faith would not survive this doomed world. Years of stress and the constant monthly pain she endured from her endometriosis took its toll on her, and she became a very weakened-looking and bitter woman. Thankfully for her, Edward's reign didn't last long because he became ill and died at the young age of 15. Not wanting his Catholic sister Mary.
He really died that young? I knew Edward VI died young, but wow. That's actually, it's a lot younger than I thought. I thought he was in his mid-20s when he passed. God, it's about to be time, man. Time for her to take over.
To take over the throne, Edward had requested upon his dying breath that this Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, succeed him. She would rule as queen for only 9 days before Mary's supporters rose up to help her take her rightful place on the throne. At the age of 37, Mary's reign as queen finally began. Mary entered London in a triumphant procession in 1553. The people of England wept tears of joy, elated that their beloved daughter of King Henry VIII and Catherine.
Technically, the cousin that ruled for 9 days, wouldn't she be the first female monarch then? I had never heard of that, actually. I always thought it just went straight to Mary next, but if that's true, let me know, you guys, because technically it may not be a full reign, but 9 days is 9 days. So does that technically make Mary the second female monarch in England history? Huh.
of Aragon was finally taking her place on the throne. Little did the people know what was in store for them. They didn't seem to realize the extent of Mary's anger and contempt. She was a queen fueled by resentment and passionate religious obsession. She was determined to restore the Catholic faith and take revenge against those who had made her last 25 years so miserable, namely Protestants. She quickly became an unpopular queen with the initiation of her mass executions and burnings. To tie England with Catholicism even further, she finally got married to Philip II of Spain from her mother's native Catholic country. This, however, did not provide her with the happy life she so long desired. Though she adored her husband and was smitten with him, there is no record about how he felt about her in return, but we can speculate with a certain level of ease that he didn't feel the same way. One indicator of this has to do with rumors that were circling about Philip having affairs with other women. Another clue has to do with what Philip's closest confidant said to him when he praised him on his ability to deal with a woman with whom he could expect neither physical pleasure nor satisfaction. The now 38-year-old Mary was not exactly perceived as attractive, far from it actually, as the charms of her face had faded from years of intense mental pain and suffering. One Spaniard reportedly remarked, "The queen is not pretty, not at all, is low, fragile structures instead of fat, with very white hair and blonde, has no eyebrows, is holy, she dresses very badly." She was
What do you mean she has no eyebrows? Does she pluck them, or did she lose, like, the hair from stress? What do you mean she has no eyebrows?
also getting older and her childbearing years were quickly slipping away. Though it's a harsh sentiment, Philip very likely only married Mary for political gain, not for love. This is made all the more sad when you consider that she had also gone through a period of feeling unloved by her father. It seemed she couldn't catch a break. Life had not been good to her, and her misfortunes would only continue. Soon after her marriage, it seemed though her luck had changed. When she stopped menstruating, felt nauseated in the mornings, and gained weight, her royal physician suspected she could be pregnant. People rejoiced, bells rang, and there were celebrations held on the streets. Though she grew a belly, however, there was no baby. It is possible that she had a tumor, though many assert she was experiencing a phantom pregnancy, a conditional phenomenon thought to occur when a woman wants a child badly enough and winds up deluding herself into believing she's pregnant, while then displaying the classic bodily symptoms of pregnancy. At the time, there was no...
Is that really a thing, a phantom pregnancy? I got my degree in marine biology, so I mean I've learned a decent bit about biology, and I've never heard of that. Let me know in the comments if you guys have heard about a phantom pregnancy. That's interesting.
No way to distinguish a false pregnancy from a real one, so the only way to find out for sure was to simply wait until the baby was born. A birth chamber had been prepared for her, and a nursery contained a beautifully carved cradle. Many women were hired on standby to help care for the baby once it arrived. Letters announcing the birth had also been written and were ready to be sent. Time passed, but there still was no baby. In denial, Mary continued to insist that she could feel the child move in her womb. Rumors and speculations were quickly spreading as more time passed. Maybe Mary had lied about being pregnant to give people hope for an heir. Maybe instead of a baby, Mary was carrying a monkey. Eventually, she had to come to terms with the fact that she was not really pregnant. After going through 2 false pregnancies, Mary faced the cold, hard reality that she would not have an heir. Her childbearing years were over. She was enraged with the idea that Elizabeth would succeed the throne after her. She hated Elizabeth as the daughter of Anne Boleyn, the woman who started all the misery in Mary's life. She was also incredibly jealous of Elizabeth because she possessed the 2 main qualities that Mary did not. That is, Elizabeth was both young and beautiful. After a short, disastrous reign, Mary died in 1558, most likely from ovarian cancer derived from her untreated endometriosis. Her vision for a Catholic England crumbled, and Elizabeth took the throne. Mary's husband Philip, whom she loved so wholeheartedly, wrote that he felt only a moderate grief for her. Mary was beguiled even after...
Yo, that's harsh. Your wife dies and you just feel mild grief? This guy wasn't very cool, dude. Like, I know she wasn't an easy girl to get along with, but come on. Jesus Christ. What a douche.
Death because she was not buried next to her mother, as per her request. Instead, she ended up being buried next to Elizabeth. To make matters worse, the gravesite of Mary and her hated sister is a monument to Elizabeth, which completely overshadows her. Mary is commemorated only by a slab of black marble with the infamous name Bloody Mary on it. In this way, it seems that Mary has pretty much gone down as one of history's biggest losers. She had a terribly difficult life, fraught with grief, pain, and misery. On top of everything, she never got her way in the end. Even in death, she pales in comparison to her sister, and her jealousy may very well extend into the afterlife. Now, after hearing the full story, we turn to...
Alright, you guys, Let's have a conversation about that. So what do you think? Mary the First. I mean, there's been plenty of different, modern things in England. I could talk about Wessex. I could talk about East Anglia, all that. Some of the kings back then. I could talk about when it was first united. Edward the First, I think. Different things like that. I could talk about her little sister, Elizabeth the First. I mean, a lot of people really liked her. Wonderful queen. That being said, I thought Mary fit this contest perfect because she is the most interesting in my opinion. She, I mean, first off, she had a horrible life, which, in my opinion, kind of seems abnormal of like the royalty at the time. They usually lived a pretty good life, and on top of that, she had problems that weren't diagnosed at the time medically. She couldn't talk to her mom. She just had to live with her father being an asshole, you know? There was just all kinds of different things. And then on top of all that, she burned Protestants alive. So, I mean, that's pretty weird. Or interesting, I guess I could say. Anyway, I do have 2 more videos coming. Again, if you guys haven't checked out the other 4, go check them out. I do have a playlist on my channel for them. We had Julius Caesar, then we had Ivan the Terrible, then Alexander the Great, and, wow, I can't remember the 4th one, and I feel bad. Anyway, go check out my playlist. And if you guys haven't subscribed, make sure you hit that sub button and ring the bell because I am going to be releasing 2 more of these over the next 2 days at 8 a.m. and then we'll have a little vote. Anyway, till next time, I love y'all. This is Ace Ty, and I'm out.